Bullets splintered the wooden crates around Magnolia Hartwell as she crouched behind the general store's loading dock, her heart hammering against her ribs. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across Willowbend's main street, where 3 masked riders had cornered her after she'd witnessed their botched bank robbery. "Come out, lady. You know you saw our faces." The leader's voice cracked like a whip through the dusty air. Sheriff Caspian Riverside burst around the corner, his Colt .45 already drawn, silver badge glinting, his steel-gray eyes locked onto Magnolia's terrified amber ones for a split second, before he dove behind the water trough beside her. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice rough as sandpaper, but oddly comforting. More gunfire erupted. Caspian returned fire with deadly precision, each shot calculated and measured. Outlaw yelped and clutched his shoulder. The sheriff's jaw was set like granite, but Magnolia noticed how his free hand instinctively moved to shield her when debris flew their way. "The stable?" he whispered urgently.
"Can you make it?"
She nodded, gathering her torn burgundy skirts. When he provided cover fire, she sprinted across the 20 yards of exposed ground, her boots kicking up dust clouds. Caspian followed, moving with the fluid grace of a man who'd faced death too many times to count. Inside the dim stable, horses whinnied nervously. Magnolia pressed her back against a stall door, watching this stranger who'd risked his life for hers. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and a scar along his left temple that spoke of old violence. "Who are you?" she breathed, though she already knew. Everyone in 3 counties knew about the mysterious sheriff who'd cleaned up Willowbend in just 6 months. Caspian Riverside. He reloaded his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Okay. And you're the new school teacher from back east?" Magnolia Hartwell. She smoothed her disheveled hair with trembling fingers. "How did you, small town?" His mouth quirked in what might have been a smile if not for the gunshots still echoing outside. "Plus, Cordelia mentioned you'd arrived on yesterday's stage." Magnolia's breath caught. Cordelia Riverside was the town's auctioneer, a fierce woman who commanded respect from every rancher and merchant for miles around. She was also known for her fierce independence and sharp tongue. "Cordelia is your sister?" Something flickered in his eyes, protectiveness, perhaps, or old pain. "She runs the auction house while I keep the peace." The irony wasn't lost on Magnolia. She'd been in Willowbend exactly 24 hours, and she'd already noticed how Cordelia Riverside could make grown men squirm with a single glance during livestock auctions. Now, here was her brother, every bit as commanding but in an entirely different way. "They're gone," Caspian announced after listening to the sudden silence. He holstered his gun and turned to face her fully. "But they'll be back. They know you can identify them." Magnolia lifted her chin with more bravado than she felt. "And I suppose I'll need protection." "Already arranged." He stepped closer and she caught the scent of leather and gunpowder that clung to him. "You'll stay at the boarding house, Mrs. Abernathy will look after you, and I'll make sure someone's always watching. And you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Will you be watching too?" Something electric passed between them in that shadowy stable. Caspian's gray eyes darkened, and for a moment, the dangerous sheriff disappeared, replaced by a man who looked at her as if she were something precious he'd unexpectedly discovered. "Count on it," he said quietly. Outside, the town began to stir, as people emerged from their hiding places, but inside the stable, Magnolia Hartwell felt as though her entire world had shifted on its axis. She'd come to Willowbend to teach children and start fresh. She hadn't expected to find herself in the crosshairs of outlaws or in the protective shadow of a man whose very presence made her pulse race. The danger was far from over, but somehow she wasn't afraid anymore. 3 days later, Magnolia stood at the schoolhouse window, watching Cordelia Riverside command the weekly cattle auction with the authority of a general leading troops. The woman's copper hair blazed in the afternoon sun as she called out bids, her voice carrying clearly across the crowded town square. "Lot 17. Fine Angus bull from the Morrison Ranch. Do I hear $40? Magnolia had been studying the auctioneer since the shooting, noting the family resemblance she'd missed before. Cordelia had the same steel-gray eyes as her brother, the same stubborn set to her jaw when challenged. but where Caspian carried himself with quiet menace, Cordelia radiated fierce competence. "Miss Hartwell?" Young Timothy Hawthorne tugged at her sleeve. "Are we having lessons today?" She turned from the window to find her 7 pupils gathered hopefully around their slate boards. Word of the shooting had spread quickly, and their parents had been reluctant to send them to school. But children in frontier towns grew up understanding. Danger was part of life. "Of course, Timothy. Take your seats, everyone." As she began the day's reading lesson, Magnolia's attention kept drifting to the square outside. Caspian had been true to his word. She'd spotted him, or his deputy, Jasper Quinn, watching the schoolhouse regularly, but she hadn't spoken to the sheriff. Privately, since their encounter in the stable, the auction concluded with Cordelia's signature sharp bang of her gavel. "Sold to Henderson for $62. She began organizing her papers with military precision. Magnolia dismissed her students and was wiping down the blackboard when a shadow filled the doorway. "Miss Hartwell." Cordelia Riverside stepped inside, her presence immediately commanding the small space. She wore practical riding clothes and boots that had seen hard use, but her bearing was unmistakably elegant. "Mrs. Riverside." Down her cloth and faced the auctioneer directly. "To what do I owe this visit?" Cordelia's laugh was sharp as winter wind. "Straight to the point? I appreciate that in a woman." She moved to examine the children's artwork displayed on the walls. "My brother tells me you handled yourself well during the shooting. Your brother saved my life, as he has a habit of doing that." Something complicated crossed Cordelia's features. "But that's not why I'm here." Magnolia waited, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. "Caspian hasn't told you about our past," Cordelia continued, still studying a child's drawing of a horse, "about why we came to Willowbend. It's not my business. It might become your business." Cordelia turned, fixing Magnolia with those familiar gray eyes. "He's watching you, Miss Hartwell, not just for protection. I mean, any fool can see the way he looks at you." Heat crept up Magnolia's neck. "I don't know what you mean, don't you?" Cordelia moved closer, her voice dropping. "You're an educated woman from Philadelphia. What are you really doing in a place like Willowbend?" The question hit closer to home than Magnolia liked. She'd fled east after her father's business partner had tried to force her into marriage to settle debts. But she wasn't ready to share that story with anyone, especially not Caspian's formidable sister. "I wanted to teach," she said simply. Cordelia studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. We all have our secrets." She moved toward the door, then paused. "But understand this, my brother and I have been through hell together. He's finally found some peace in this town, and I won't see it destroyed. I have no intention of destroying anything." Good Cordelia's smile was sharp as a blade. "'Cause those men who shot at you, they're still out there. And if they come back, you'll need all the allies you can get." After the auctioneer left, Magnolia sank into her chair, her hands trembling slightly. She'd sensed there were depths to both Riverside siblings that she hadn't begun to explore. But Cordelia's warning, was it a threat or advice? Made one thing clear. Her growing feelings for Caspian Riverside were leading her into dangerous territory. Outside, the sheriff appeared in the square, making his evening rounds. Their eyes met through the window, and even at this distance, Magnolia felt that same electric charge from the stable. She was definitely in dangerous territory. The attack came at dawn. Magnolia jolted awake to the sound of breaking glass downstairs at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. Heavy boots thundered on the wooden floors, accompanied by rough voices she recognized with cold dread. Where is she? Where's the schoolteacher? She grabbed her wrapper and crept to the window. 3 horses stood tied outside, the same riders from the bank robbery, their faces no longer masked in the pale morning light. Her blood chilled as she recognized the leader, Virgil Cartwright, a man whose wanted poster decorated sheriffs' offices across 2 territories. "She ain't down here, boss," came a gravelly voice from below. "Must be upstairs." Mrs. Abernathy's frightened whimper cut through the air. Magnolia's hands clenched into fists. She couldn't cower while an innocent woman suffered for her sake. The sound of boots on the stairs galvanized her into action. She eased open her window and climbed onto the narrow balcony, her bare feet silent on the cold wood. The drop to the alley below looked impossibly far, but staying meant certain death. A door slammed open behind her. She's gone. Here, Cartwright. Magnolia's heart leaped as Caspian's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. He stood at the mouth of the alley, completely calm despite facing 3 armed men alone. His gray eyes found hers on the balcony, and she saw relief flicker across his features. Well, the famous Sheriff Riverside. Cartwright's laugh was ugly. Heard tell you used to run with the Brennan gang down in Arizona. That true? Magnolia's breath caught. She watched Caspian's face go stone still, but he didn't deny it. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. Not so long that folks wouldn't be interested to know their sheriff used to rob banks himself. Cartwright's smile was vicious. Of course, we might keep quiet about that, ... For a price. Name it. The woman, she dies, and your secret stays buried. Magnolia saw Caspian's hand hover near his gun, and suddenly she understood the weight he'd been carrying. He'd been an outlaw once. She could see it now in the way he moved. The careful precision that came from a life lived on the wrong side of the law. Can't do that, Caspian said, his voice steady as granite. Then I guess everyone's going to learn about your past. Cartwright drew his weapon. Starting with her, the explosion of gunfire shattered the morning quiet. Magnolia watched. In terror and awe, as Caspian moved like liquid death, his shots finding their marks with deadly accuracy. But he was outnumbered, and a bullet creased his shoulder, spinning him against the alley wall. That's when Cordelia appeared like an avenging angel, her rifle speaking with authority. Get away from my brother, you bastards, remaining outlaws. Suddenly caught between 2 deadly shooters, broke and ran for their horses. But Cartwright, wounded and desperate, raised his gun toward Magnolia on the balcony. Time slowed. She saw Caspian surge forward despite his wound, saw the outlaw's finger tighten on the trigger. Then the world exploded in fire and smoke as Caspian's final shot found its mark. Cartwright crumpled to the dusty ground. His threat ended forever. In the sudden silence, Magnolia climbed down from the balcony to find Caspian leaning heavily against the wall, blood seeping through his shirt. Cordelia was already binding his shoulder with strips torn from her riding skirt. You fool, she muttered. Could have gotten yourself killed over a woman you've known less than a week? Some things are worth the risk, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Magnolia's face. Cordelia looked between them, then shook her head. Well, I suppose now she knows the truth about us. The question is, what are you going to do about it, Miss Hartwell? Magnolia knelt beside Caspian, her hand finding his uninjured one. His past didn't matter, not when she'd seen him risk everything to protect her in an entire town. I'm going to help you heal, she said simply, and then we're going to talk. The relief in his gray eyes was worth every moment of fear she'd endured. 2 weeks later, Magnolia sat beside Caspian on the porch of the sheriff's office, watching the sun paint Willowbend's main street in shades of gold and amber. His shoulder had healed well under her careful ministrations, though he still favored it when he thought no one was looking. Tell me about Arizona, she said quietly. He was silent. For so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and rough with old pain. I was 17 when I joined up with Marcus Brennan's gang. My parents had died of fever, left Cordelia and me with nothing but debt and a reputation as easy marks. His jaw tightened. The law didn't seem interested in helping us, so I decided to take what we needed. Magnolia studied his profile. Seeing the boy, he must have been desperate, angry, fiercely protective of his sister. We weren't killers, he continued. Brennan had rules about that, but we took from banks and trains, justified it by telling. Ourselves we only robbed from those who could afford it. He laughed bitterly. Amazing how easy it is to rationalize when you're hungry. How long? She asked. 3 years. Cordelia hated it, but she stayed with me because she was afraid I'd get myself killed without her to watch my back. She was probably right. He turned to look at her, and she saw the weight of old guilt in his gray eyes. She saved my life more times than I can count. What changed? A job went wrong in Tucson. Brennan shot a bank guard who tried to be a hero, killed him in cold blood, even though the man was surrendering. Caspian's hands clenched into fists. That night, Cordelia and I rode away. We'd had enough of that life. And you became a lawman. Not right away. We drifted for a while, took honest work where we could find it, but everywhere we went, our past followed us. He stood and walked to the porch rail, gripping it until his knuckles went white. Then I met Sheriff Coleman in Abilene. He was an old man ready to retire, and he saw something in me worth salvaging. Trained me, vouched for me when I applied for this job. Magnolia joined him at the rail, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. And Cordelia? She has a gift for numbers and organization. Started helping with estate auctions, then took over when old Peterson retired. She's the best auctioneer in 3 territories, and everyone respects her for it. She's protective of you. We're all each other has. We turned to face her, and she saw vulnerability in his expression that he'd rarely let anyone see. Till now, the words hung between them, heavy with implication. Magnolia felt her heart begin to race as he stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. I know I have no right to ask, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My past, the danger that follows me. She silenced him by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, then deepened as he pulled her against him with desperate tenderness. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I don't care about your past, she whispered against his lips. What matters is who you are now. The man who protects this town, who saved my life, who carries the weight of everyone's safety on his shoulders. Magnolia, ... Name was a prayer on his lips. I love you, Caspian Riverside. Former outlaw, current sheriff, and the most honorable man I've ever known. The joy that blazed in his eyes made her heart soar. He kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise and hope for a future neither had dared imagine. From inside the office came the sound of someone clearing their throat, loudly. They broke apart to find Cordelia standing in the doorway, arms crossed but wearing what might have been a smile. About time, she said dryly. Now, can we discuss wedding plans? This town needs a sheriff's wife who can actually shoot straight. Magnolia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. She was home. The wedding plans would have to wait. 3 days after Caspian's proposal, Deputy Quinn burst into the schoolhouse where Magnolia was teaching arithmetic to her pupils. Miss Hartwell, sheriff needs you at the jail right now. And Magnolia dismissed the children early and hurried across the dusty street, her heart hammering with worry. She found Caspian standing over a map spread across his desk, his face grim as winter stone. What is it? She asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. Brennan's escape from territorial prison, Cordelia said from her seat by the window. She'd been cleaning her rifle with methodical precision. Word came in on the morning wire. Magnolia felt ice form in her stomach. Marcus Brennan, your former gang leader? The same? Caspian's jaw was tight. He's got a score to settle with Cordelia and me. Territorial Marshal thinks he'll head this way. Then we leave, Magnolia said immediately. Pack up and go somewhere he can't find us. No. Caspian's voice was steel. I won't run again. This town trusted me to protect them, and that's what I'm going to do. Even if it gets you killed. The words burst out before she could stop them. Cordelia looked up from her rifle. Miss Hartwell, Magnolia, you need to understand something. About my brother. He spent the last 8 years trying to atone for what we did. Running now would destroy him. Magnolia studied Caspian's face, seeing the truth there. This wasn't just about duty, it was about redemption, about proving to himself and the world that he'd truly changed. Then I stay too, she said quietly. Hell you do. Caspian was around the desk in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. Brennan's a killer, Magnolia. He won't hesitate to hurt you to get to me. I won't leave the man I love to face this alone. They stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Cordelia's dry voice cut through the tension. You're both forgetting something important, she said, standing and shouldering her rifle. Brennan doesn't know about Magnolia, but he does know that Caspian and I always worked better as a team. A plan began to form in Magnolia's mind. Dangerous, risky, but it might work. What if we use that against him? Caspian frowned. What do you mean? Brennan expects to find the siblings who betrayed him. He doesn't expect to find a sheriff with a whole town backing him up. She moved to the map, studying the approaches to Willowbend. How many men does he usually ride with? 6, maybe 8. Cordelia answered, but they're all experienced killers. And how many able-bodied men in this town can handle a gun? Caspian's eyes began to gleam with understanding. Maybe 20. More if we count the women like Mrs. Patterson, who can shoot the eye out of a sparrow. Then we make a stand. Not just you, but all of us together. Magnolia traced her finger along. The main street on the map? We know this ground better than they do. It's dangerous, Caspian warned. These aren't bank robbers looking for easy money. These are men with nothing left to lose. Then they're no different from us, Magnolia replied, because I have no intention of losing you now. The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Caspian and Cordelia spread word through the town, calling together everyone willing to fight. To Magnolia's surprise, nearly 30 people showed up at the town hall meeting ranchers. Shopkeepers, even the local minister armed with an old army rifle. Brennan comes looking for 2 people. Caspian addressed the crowd. Find an entire town that won't back down. Old Ben Morrison, the cattle rancher, spat into his spittoon. This is our town, Sheriff. We've seen what kind of man you are these past months. If Brennan wants trouble, he can have it. Chorus of agreement rose from the assembled townspeople. Watching them rally around her future husband, Magnolia felt a fierce pride swell in her chest. They would face whatever came together as one town, as one family. Brennan came at dawn, just as Caspian had predicted. Magnolia crouched behind the blacksmith's forge, her hands steady on the shotgun Cordelia had pressed into her arms despite Caspian's protests. Through the early morning mist, she could see 8 riders approaching down the main street, their silhouettes dark and menacing. Against the pale sky, Marcus Brennan rode at their head. Tall man with silver-streaked hair and cold eyes that held no trace of mercy. Even from a distance, Magnolia could feel the aura of controlled violence that surrounded him like a storm cloud. The town appeared deserted, but she knew better. Behind every window, in every doorway, the people of Willowbend waited with weapons. Ready. Mrs. Patterson had claimed the hotel's 2nd floor with her precision rifle. The Morrison brothers had positioned themselves in the grain silo. Even gentle Mrs. Abernathy clutched a derringer behind the boarding house curtains. Brennan reined in his horse directly in front of the sheriff's office. His voice carried clearly in the still air. Caspian, Cordelia. I know you're here. Time to settle old debts. The office door opened, and Caspian stepped out with his hands visible but near his guns. Cordelia emerged from the alley beside the jail, her rifle cradled casually in her arms. Marcus, Caspian said quietly. It's been a long time. 8 years. Brennan's smile was winter-sharp. 8 years of running, hiding, playing at being respectable citizens. Did you really think? I'd forgotten. We left the gang clean, Cordelia said, her voice steady as granite. No blood between us then. No blood. Brennan laughed, the sound ugly in the morning quiet. You cost me everything when you walked away. Made the others think they could just leave whenever they pleased. Half my gang scattered within a month. Maybe. That says something about your leadership, Caspian replied mildly. Brennan's face darkened. Always were too smart for your own good boy, but not smart enough, it seems. You led us right to your new life. His gaze swept over the apparently empty street. Nice little town you've got here. Be a shame if something happened to it. Yes. The only thing happening here is you turning around. And riding out, Caspian said, his hand dropping closer to his gun. This is your only warning. Warning? Brennan threw back his head and laughed. You're outnumbered 4-1, Sheriff. What are you and your sister going to do against all of us? They won't be alone. The voice came from above Mrs. Patterson, leaning out of the hotel window, her rifle trained on Brennan's chest. Suddenly, the street came alive with the people of Willowbend. Windows opened, doors swung wide, and gun barrels appeared like deadly. Flowers blooming in the dawn light. Brennan's eyes widened as he realized he'd ridden into a trap. His men shifted nervously in their saddles, suddenly aware they were surrounded by hostile weapons. 32 guns, Caspian said conversationally. All pointed at you and yours. Still think you like the odds? For a moment, Brennan seemed to consider retreat. Then his face twisted with rage and old hatred. If I can't have you alive, I'll settle for dead. He went for his gun. The street exploded in gunfire. Magnolia watched in terror and pride as Caspian moved with deadly grace. His shots finding their marks while bullets sparked off the wooden posts around him. Cordelia had taken cover behind a water trough, picking off Brennan's men with methodical precision. The battle was fierce, but brief. When the smoke cleared, 5 of Brennan's riders lay motionless in the dust. 2 others had thrown down their weapons in surrender, and Brennan himself knelt in the street. Clutching a shoulder wound, his gun lying yards away, Caspian approached slowly, his weapon still drawn. It's over, Marcus. Is it Brennan's smile? Was bloody, but vicious. You'll always be what you were, boy. Killer and a thief. This town will learn that eventually, maybe Caspian said quietly. Mutt. Today they saw a man willing to die to protect them. That's all that matters. The old outlaw's laugh turned into a cough as Deputy Quinn moved in with shackles. The nightmare was finally over. 6 months later, Magnolia Riverside stood at the window of her new home, watching her husband pin his sheriff's star to his vest. With the same careful precision he applied to everything in his ordered life. The small house behind the jail wasn't much, but it was theirs, and she'd never been happier. Second thoughts? Caspian asked, catching her reflection in the mirror as he adjusted his gun belt. About marrying an ex-outlaw who attracts trouble? Like honey draws flies. She turned and walked into his arms. Never. He kissed her softly, then deeper when she melted against him. Even after 3 months of marriage, the fire between them burned as bright as ever. I have to testify at Brennan's trial today, he said against her lips. Should be the last of it. The territorial judge had finally arrived to hear the case against Marcus Brennan and his surviving gang members. The entire ordeal had dragged on for months, but justice was moving at last. Will you be all right? She asked, searching his gray eyes for any trace of the old shadows. With you waiting for me at home, I'll be better than all right. A knock at the door interrupted them. Cordelia entered without ceremony, as was her way, carrying a telegram and wearing the satisfied expression of a woman who'd just concluded profitable business. Morning, you two. Hope I'm not interrupting anything too scandalous. Magnolia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Caspian just grinned. What brings you by so early? This. Cordelia waved the telegram. Just got word from territorial prison. Brennan's been sentenced to life at hard labor. His remaining men got 20 years each. Her smile was sharp with satisfaction. Case closed, brother. Relief flooded through Magnolia like cool water. Threat that had haunted them was finally, truly over. There's more, Cordelia continued, settling into their best chair with characteristic directness. Got an interesting proposition yesterday. The Cattlemen's Association wants to hire me to run their big annual auction in Denver. 3 months' work, but the pay would be enough to expand my operation considerably. Caspian frowned. You're thinking of leaving Willow Bend? Temporarily? But it got me thinking about the future. She looked between them meaningfully. This town's growing, Caspian. The railroad's coming through next year, and with it, more people, more opportunities, more problems that'll need solving. Magnolia understood immediately. You think? He should run for territorial marshal. I think he'd be perfect for it. Cordelia's gaze fixed on her brother. You've proven yourself here, earned respect across 3 counties, and with Magnolia's education and social graces, you'd have the political support needed for higher office. Caspian was quiet for a long moment, considering it would mean more travel, more time away from home. It would also mean helping more people, Magnolia said softly, making a difference beyond just Willow Bend. He looked at her with that expression. She'd come to treasures if she were the most precious thing in his world. What do you think? I think, she said, standing and moving to the stove to pour coffee. That Sheriff Riverside has a nice ring to it, but Marshal Riverside sounds even better. Cordelia laughed, the sound rare and genuine. spoken like a true politician's wife. Speaking of wives, Magnolia said, setting cups before them, when are you going to find yourself a husband, Cordelia? There are several respectable men in town who've been asking about you. When I find one who can outshoot me, outsmart me, and isn't intimidated by a woman who makes more money than he does, Cordelia replied dryly, so probably never. Ever say never, Caspian warned with a grin. I thought the same thing about love until a certain schoolteacher got herself shot at in my town. They sat around the small table, sharing coffee and plans for the future. Magnolia felt a deep contentment settle over her. They'd all come so far from those desperate people who'd once lived outside the law's protection. Now they were a family, bound not just by blood or marriage, but by shared trials and unconditional loyalty. Outside, Willowbend was waking up to another peaceful day, protected by a sheriff who'd learned that sometimes the greatest redemption came from serving others. And in the little house behind the jail, 3 people who'd found their way home made plans to build something even better.